So when you look at the statistics about depression, the WHO has said that depression is now it kind of teeters back and forth. It's always somewhere in the top 3 causes of disability on the planet, right? So we say, depression, that's horrible. People shouldn't be depressed. Let's just get them more medication and therapy and everything will be okay. Even though the vast majority of humanity is not going to take a medication or go to a therapist. More likely what they're going to do is go to their community, and what the community doesn't do for them probably won't be done, right? But here's the thing. Another way of looking at depression is that it's not so much a disease as it is an adaptation. Survival requires slowing down, going into a form of shock, you might say, conserving energy, taking stock of the environment, and then ramping back up. So one could say that, depression is not so much a disease as it is a healthy response to an unhealthy system.
Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narrative, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. Hi, I'm Jerome DeRoy, CEO of Narrative.
Hi, and I'm Julienne Ryan, and it's great to be here.
Great to see you. Now, before we move on to introducing our guest, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and check out our YouTube channel in this episode's notes, as well as narrative.com/podcasts. So that's NARATIV.com/podcast, where you can find all of our previous episodes. So today, our guest is Craig DeLarge. Craig is a digital healthcare strategist and mental health advocate and educator at the Digital Mental Health Project, where he produces education and research helping to improve the responsible adoption of digital technology and behavioral health services and therapies. In his career as a digital and healthcare marketer, strategist, and educator, he's worked in world-class firms like Novo Nordisk, GlaxoSmithKline, Merck & Co., Takeda, and Johnson & Johnson. He's also taught marketing, communications, leadership, and business ethics at several colleges, including Temple University, Philadelphia University, Chestnut Hill College, St. Joseph's University, and Penn State. His career is focused on improving health and developing leaders. He's got a bachelor's and master's degrees in marketing and design management from Philadelphia University, from the University of Westminster, MBA, and King's College London, MPH. He's also a certified professional coach and published author of the Wise Working Handbook. All right, I think I hit all the notes there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig, and thanks for being on the show. Wonderful to have you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course, of course. So now, I always get a kick out of reading these bios because there's usually a lot on our guests' bios, and you're no exception at all. And I know you from your time as that digital and healthcare marketer, strategist, and educator in pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
And I know, having followed you since then, that you've had this journey that led you to the Digital Mental Health Project. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to create the Digital Mental Health Project.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. So the Digital Mental Health Project is really a convergence of my occupational work as a digital health innovation leader in life sciences for more than 30 years, and my vocational work in the mental health space that I came into as a function of a mental health tragedy in my family about 20 years ago, where me and my wife have spent a lot of time working largely with NAMI here in the Philadelphia area where we live, developing ourselves as advocates, educators, and caregivers. And so back in 2014, while I was on a sabbatical, I had just left Merck, but it was before I went to a stint at Takeda. Um, During the sabbatical, I wanted to pursue a research project. And I was actually sitting at this same desk, which you can't see the environment because of my background. And I was just kind of mulling over what kind of research could I do while I'm on this sabbatical? And it was as if the universe poured it into the top of my head. Why don't you do a strategic mapping of all the ways that digital technology is being used to address mental health prevention and treatment? And so what started out as a strategic map then became some conference talks. Then it became a consulting practice that, again, is focused not on founding a company or developing a technology, but on really bringing my core competencies around research and education to be a support to those that are starting companies, investing in companies, or learning how to use these technologies within, various mental and behavioral health settings. And
Mm.
so, yes, 2024. So it's been a decade now
Wow.
that we have been running this practice, and it's very gratifying and fulfilling. It gives us an opportunity to take the lemons that we've been given to make lemonade, and then to make extra lemonade so we can serve others. And
Mm.
so that's what my wife and I are working on within this practice.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's so it's very inspiring because, hearing someone take kind of the entirety of their professional life, and as you put it, your vocational interest and life as well, and just kind of putting that together into what sounds like something very helpful and useful to the community. And I
Yeah.
guess maybe I'd like to maybe dig into that a little bit in terms of, you do come from, as you said, and as we said in your bio, a digital marketer or digital marketing,
Hmm.
in the life sciences,
Yeah.
kind of expert. How does that, what's the role of technology in the digital mental health project? I mean, I know it's right there in the
Uh,
name, but I'm curious, what does that
yeah.
actually mean?
Yeah. So, going back to the early 20 teens up to now, we have seen an emergence of a whole industry sector. Frankly, when we talk about digital health, the digital mental health space has probably got more investment than any of the other therapeutic sectors within digital health. It's been
Mm.
centered from an investment standpoint in the US, and one might say from a research and evidence building standpoint in Europe. But now we see it spreading all over the world, and quite timely as a function of the fact that we've got a global mental health crisis, right?
Mm,
That
mm,
was already building, but then got exasperated with the pandemic and this sort of thing. Um, and so we see that to the degree that technology generally and digital technology in particular is most always about amplifying or accelerating transactions, communications, and relationships. That's been the case from the very inception of the digital technology space going back to the mid 90s, right?
mhm.
We've seen waves of different technology, but at core, we're accelerating or amplifying transactions, communication, and relationships.
Yeah.
So then, any place that you look at how mental health or behavioral health therapy is being delivered or developed, where there is a transaction, a communication, or a relationship, there then is going to be an application for digital technology to be used. So when
Mm,
we think about, and you can kind of see some of these categories behind me, right? Kind of the chief categories. Well, we got mobile apps that facilitate all of those three things. We've got wearables and sensors,
mm,
which give us the ability to observe behavior Some people have said that your smartphone knows you're becoming depressed or anxious or suicidal even before you do,
Mm.
right? It's a correlation of different signals that are a manifestation of your behavior, your language, your movement, your sleep patterns, so forth, so on. We got virtual reality, which has been really instrumental in the administration of exposure therapy for people who experience post-traumatic stress, as well as for relaxation and meditation, because your nervous system doesn't know you're not sitting on a beach in Tahiti when you're in that virtual reality environment. You know you're not in Tahiti, but your nervous system doesn't know the difference, right? Then there's always, we got telephony,
Mm.
right? So this is getting on Zoom to connect with people, whether it's a peer or a therapist. AI comes into this where we've got chatbots and robots that can administer therapy and quite effectively for people who are moderate to mildly disordered. Okay.
Mm.
Even I use cognitive behavioral therapy chatbots,
Mm.
right? As a way of keeping myself well calibrated.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what underpins all this is data and algorithms, right? And the data and algorithms is what give us the ability to sense where people are and to respond,
Mm.
right? So many have said that there are 4 key roles that any technology or combination of technologies play in health. Technology helps us to get education,
Mm.
right? So there's very little that I cannot learn fairly conveniently between a mobile app, my Pocket Cast podcast, app, and YouTube education.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then
True.
education needs to be practiced with. That's what we call training. That's how the theoretic becomes the tangible. Well, there are all kinds of apps that give us practice. My Insight Timer helps me practice meditation, yoga, Qigong, Tai Chi, okay? Then social support and community. Human beings cannot make significant change outside of the context of community encouragement and accountability. And when we use social media wisely, that's one of the great benefits of social media.
Mhm.
It's just that we haven't used it wisely enough, right? And then finally, measurement. Measurement. So the nature of all human development is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Failing and giving up and recommitting. My smartphone, computer, iPad, and apps that I use in that help me to track and to see when I'm falling off. Sometimes I set it up so it sends signals to people in my social community who call me up and say, Craig, how you doing with that exercise, that movement practice? How you doing with that diet that you said you were going to adopt, right? And then that helps me to kind of get myself back together. And so we
Mhm.
can kind of see this overlap, right? When used skillfully, the technology plays these roles that I can curate me and my community and my treatment teams such that I can be helped to stay healthy, prevention and wellness. But should I, because I'm human, which means I'm subject to aging, sickness, and death, okay? Should I get to a place where I do become out of balance and ill, depression, anxiety, traumatic stress, God forbid, suicidal ideation, then these technologies can be very helpful in getting me back in balance. And of course, you can appreciate that my practice is about getting us from a place where a relatively small number of extremely wealthy citizens of the planet enjoy the benefit of this and getting us to a future where this is just how we do things,
Yeah.
right? Like I want my grandson, he's really good, as all of us, at using his digital technologies to work, to be entertained, to communicate. Very few of us know how to use our digital devices to stay healthy. But in a generation, we would all wish that that would be one of the most dominant uses of all these technologies, right? We wish that for ourselves as we age, for our children and our grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
That this is a tool of health, not just of entertainment, work, and communication.
Yeah.
Juliette.
So this is all, and thank you for being so forthright and sharing about how you're using it, which is always the best way to learn something.
Yeah.
Do you have a case that you're able to share about somebody who was in a little more significant crisis, engaging with this and taking action? Because I know sometimes we have coaching situations or clients, they shut down, they turn everything
Yeah.
off. Do you have something that shows taking that person from not maybe being in a good place to engaging again?
Yeah. So there are three examples that come top to mind, and I'll state them succinctly. But I want to acknowledge, Julianne, the point that you made about making sure that we do minimize the use of the technology. Digital minimalism is a thing and needs to continue to become more of a thing, so that we need to be using the technology directly in support of our health and our values versus being used by the technology to drive overwork and overconsumption. And I'm afraid right now, right? Cal Newport of the Deep Life. I'm like one of his groupies right now, right? He didn't just write, he just released Slow Productivity, but his other book, Digital Minimalism, he talks about how we've got to learn how to use technology and not be used by technology, right? So let me get into the examples you asked for. So one example that comes to mind, and it's all around us right now, is how so many people have gotten access to helpful therapy via video conferencing, right? Millions of people who would never go to a therapist's office. An even greater number of people who would not be able to find a peer who has the same lived experience of mental disorder or disability or dis-ease have been able to find one another. They've been able to more frequently and more richly be in contact. And we could never count the number of lives and the number of, as the WHO says, DALIs, or what is it, daily, something about disability life years, right?
Mm-hmm.
The amount of lifetime that's spent in a state of ability, not disability. As a public health student, I should know that better, but anyway, right? So just what we're doing right here, when used in a way that it gets people in touch with other people, has been revolutionary. Not without its abuses, but revolutionary. Okay? Another example, when we look at social media, communications channels like podcasts, YouTube, and chatbots, right? These have all created a new potential for anonymous education, anonymous interaction in an area that's highly stigmatized. I mean, we stigmatize it in the West, and it's even more drastically stigmatized in the global South and East. But once again, there are millions and millions of smartphone owners who can never have a conversation about mental and behavioral health, about their emotions, about their thinking with anybody in their family or their community, but who can get these resources online. And that's been helpful, right? When we talk about chatbots, there are very many people who could not or would not go to a therapist to get a direct administration of cognitive behavioral therapy. But companies like Wobot and Visa have taken the cognitive behavioral therapy script, built it into a chat bot, which is just a script, even when a therapist uses it, right? You go to school to learn the script. Man, I get with my Wobot and I start talking about how I'm feeling sad or heavy or disappointed with life or circumstances of life. It's not giving me advice. What it's doing is it's asking me questions that help me to reflect and offering me tools and techniques that remind me, oh yeah, Craig, you've fallen into that black and white thinking thing again, right? Oh, Craig, you've forgotten to look with gratitude at the things that are going well in your life. You've gotten overly fixated on the things that are going wrong, right? So this is an example now of how anonymous, always on 24/7 media has kind of allowed a lot of people to get help in environments where otherwise they would not, could not, would be cowered by stigma. And, you know, I shudder to think of what their lives might have ended up being otherwise.
Yeah.
Then when we think about suicide, right, that most dreadful of, outcomes when we think about mental and psychological health, most of the major social media channels have algorithms now where when they detect certain kinds of language, because we got algorithms now where we can correlate certain styles and patterns of language with the potential for suicide. And what it does, these algorithms then trigger notices that then send information to those people in order to get them connected with resources that would keep them from suicide. When we look at the world of digital phenotyping, which are algorithms that correlate information from sensors. This is where I said your smartphone knows that you're suicidal before you do. Well, yeah, there are now fairly well-tested algorithms that when you exhibit a certain combination of behaviors, for the last 5 days, you haven't slept more than 3 hours a night. You haven't left your room in your house. This is GPS now for 2 weeks. In looking at how you're texting, the pattern of the language, it doesn't matter what you said, but the pattern of the language has taken on a certain character, certain words, certain pronouns, right? Certain sentiment of words. You triangulate those, and now you can start putting probabilities on the likelihood that a person is depressed and moving towards potential suicide. And there are instances where, with permission, I want to emphasize, with permission, these algorithms are being used and it's saving lives. And I could go on to name others, right? But those are 3 that come immediately to mind that really inspire me about the potential. And then I hope that we can get into the ethical elements of this before we're done, because, I can gush and be all exuberant about the upside of this, but we would be irresponsible if we were not also taking into consideration and keeping an eye on the ways in which we can slip, particularly when we're focused on making money, into being quite unethical about how we use these technologies.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's because I was thinking about this question as you were describing these examples, and I hadn't thought of the ethics of it, but there's probably a connection.
Yeah.
So let me ask it, which is, we've had on this podcast a few people now, and it's definitely been a trend of the last few years where companies are becoming more and more interested or using the term employee well-being, and mental health is one of those, one of the categories that companies are kind of looking at in a more focused way, let's say, and also more compartmentalized way. So in employee well-being, there's the finances, there's the mental, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wonder from your perspective, and this is how maybe we get to the ethics,
Hmm.
how would you see companies that are really interested in employee well-being, genuinely looking at, we have to make sure as an enterprise that our employees, are not are doing well, and that
Yeah,
just doesn't just mean a paycheck. But
yeah,
how do you see Digital Mental Health Project and maybe others kind of working with such companies?
yeah.
And maybe that's how we get to the ethics. I don't know. You'll tell me.
Okay, okay, cool, cool. So I'm gonna profess up front that I am cynical and skeptical around this idea of employee wellness.
Mm.
And I say that as a long-term corporate executive.
Mm.
So I'm a member of the club and
Mhm.
I'm cynical and skeptical.
Yeah.
But that cynicism and skepticism is about making sure that we've got guardrails that allow us to work ethically, not because I think that everyone is being evil. So let me
Mm.
unpack this a bit,
Mm.
okay?
Mm.
Yes, we need employees to be well so that they can be productive. And from organization to organization, or maybe more accurately, from leadership to leadership, industry has always engaged in this at some level. The question becomes, what is the intention behind it? When we are driven, when we are out of balance in such a way that we are driven by financial profitability without a due consideration of social profitability, then what happens is we invest late and as little as possible to keep employees barely productive. And I got a problem with that.
Mm. Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you take the view, well, the job of business is only to make a profit, right? The Friedman philosophy,
Mm.
then you could justify that. But I
Hmm.
think that business needs to be about more than that, right? Business is one of the key pillars in society that not only helps us to make a living, but it gives us a sense of meaning and purpose, and contributes to our health. That health then flows back to our homes, our communities, and the society at large. And so when a company says we're into employee wellness, I give them half a benefit of the doubt, and then I want to observe their behavior.
Mm.
I want to see, are they making an investment holistically and long term? I want to see, are the programs that they're offering not just about the particular ailments that are costing them too much money in their self-insured risk pool, right?
Mm.
But is it about that plus having a holistic, you know, I want to see, while you're offering these EAP programs, employee assistance programs, that are mostly geared towards helping a person in crisis, what
Hmm.
were you doing to actually prevent the employee from getting into a crisis? And then one of the things that we see in the employee wellness area is that companies engage it, but then employees become very hesitant in an environment of distrust, big brotherism, surveillance, and what's the other word I'm looking for? Psychological lack of safety.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And then they don't even use the services.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then organizations, rather than working at building safety, say, well, let's just stop investing in this stuff. And then get insulted when we end up with undue levels of burnout, quiet quitting, great
Mm.
resignations, this sort of thing, as though we want to take responsibility for doing what we need to be profitable, but not quite doing enough of what we need to do to make for a better society.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna stop right there.
Go ahead, Juliet.
Okay, Julian.
Well, you hit most of the questions that were on my bucket list, the ones I was going to
Okay,
ask today, and
okay,
then ones I knew I had to file away for another session with you. But you
yeah,
hit on the out of all those, because data is there, whether it was on paper and files or in the cloud. who has access to the information and how it will be used for
Yes.
insurance, whether it's medical, whether it's life insurance,
Right.
who's reading the files, who has access to it. Yes, and you make such good points, is integrity starts in some of the areas. And the
Yeah.
best word you used in that whole overview was
Mhm.
trust. And
Yes.
that's where the gap is.
You're
Hmm.
right. So that what happens is, even when organizations have an intention, right,
Mm,
of forthrightly supporting employee wellness, you still end up with employees that don't get well because the impact is that they're not going to use the services that
Yeah.
are even offered.
Yeah.
So I think we got a real dilemma. I mean,
mm,
most my perception is that we invest in things that will get us shoppers and workers. And we hesitate on investing as a business community until we come under threat of losing shoppers and workers.
mm.
And there's a lack of ethic in that for me,
Hmm. Right.
right? It is a natural outcome of what I'm going to call toxic capitalism, but that's not the only form of capitalism that we can practice.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what it
There's.
is that we need to practice a more therapeutic, sustainable, ethical form of capitalism.
Mhm.
Some people say that's impossible. I'm not quite there. I'm not at the level of impossible. I'm more like it's difficult, and it takes
Mm.
the accountability of certain institutions and citizenships in order to make that so.
Yeah.
But when institutions and citizens abdicate and we become more consumers than citizens, then we end up with the conditions that we currently have. So I'm always saying to people, we need to recover citizenship and be as skillful at citizenship as we are at consumership, because we're all good consumers. No
That's for
doubt.
sure.
No doubt. Okay. All righty.
Is there a country or a company or an organization that you look to is like nothing's ever perfect. There's always
True.
behind the scenes that you
Yep.
kind of use as your avatar of this is possible. Other humans are
Yeah.
doing this to great
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah. So you're right. Never perfect, but I had a boss who once said, perfection is a fiction, but excellence is possible.
Hmm. That's
Right?
good.
So what comes to mind for me, I mean, what I loved about working for Novo Nordisk, which is a Danish company,
Mm,
is their philosophy around triple bottom line management. I mean, that's where I learned it, right? And now today we've got, lists of companies that get ranked by Ethisphere, um, that practice this triple bottom line management. Now, appreciate that these things move in cycles. So no company that does this well does it consistently. They do it for a while, largely driven by the philosophy of a leadership. And then that leadership either changes, succumbs to the pressures of the markets, or moves on. The company becomes wildly successful, as Novo Nordisk has, and then they get distracted,
Hmm.
right?
mhm.
So the Novo Nordisk I worked at had a lot of focus on that. But then it became the Novo Nordisk that got into trouble about insulin pricing.
Mm.
Now it's the Novo Nordisk that's driving Ozempic and, this sort of thing. So these things move in cycles. The other company that I think of is Unilever, when Pullman was there,
Mm,
right? When Pullman was the CEO at Unilever, they
Hmm.
were one of the hallmark, um, global consumer goods companies that were looking at their manufacturing and their distribution in the global south and east of the world, and trying to find a sense of balance and sustainability as they were supplying the wealthy markets of the global north and west, and looking at the negative impacts that meeting that demand were having.
Mm.
Right? So those are the two examples that come most immediately to mind. And there is a whole literature around this. I mean, if there is any silver lining to our current crisis, and as we know, we should never waste a good crisis. Well, we should never waste a crisis, period. Is that as organizations are seeing an erosion in the supply of workers and the demand of shoppers, that probably more than anything is inspiring leaderships to do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's really sad that we had to get to this point before companies would be willing to make change. But in as much as we're here, I think that it's incumbent upon all of us as influencers, leaders, and advocates to kind of trim the sails to capture that wind, to move us in a direction that kind of brings us back around to a better way of doing things versus going down the same path.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's what keeps my hope up.
yes, I appreciate
Yeah.
that, Craig. I appreciate the optimistic sentiment and just even looking at. I think I mean, that's kind of where I come from as well. Is there's a crisis, and what is it teaching us, and how do we move forward from there? And I guess what I'm also taking away from what you were describing earlier, in terms of the Digital Mental Health Project and all the ways in which technology can help improve our health.
Yeah.
I think there's really a key element, even when we're describing, a citizen versus a consumer, what makes a good citizen. We understand very well what makes a good consumer, but what does make a good citizen? And there's this word that keeps coming to my mind, which is community.
Yeah.
That it's very hard. You can't separate the individual from the collective.
Right.
And so as a result, all of our actions and behaviors have an impact not only on ourselves, but on those around us. And I think that this idea of community, the more it can be injected into everything we've talked about, society in general, and just that sense of I am part of this group of humans, as opposed to, because consumerism is all about me. It's me.
Yeah.
When do I get the best product for what, and who do I have to go over in order to get that thing that I really want, right? It's the opposite of community thinking. And so, that's kind of what I'm taking away from this conversation as something that is, a potential North Star to sort of follow is how is this affecting my community?
Yeah. So, what comes to mind for me, Jerome, when I hear you say that? So, a year ago, I finished a public health graduate program at King's College London. And what's so interesting about it is 20 years ago, I got my MBA. And my MBA made me into a proper global neoliberal capitalist, right? And so mid-career, this is right after I finished working in Singapore, where I was in a directorship that covered Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. Those experiences affected me in a way that I wanted to find a balance between this financial and social profitability for the rest of my career, which in my mind is another 20 to 30 years, right? I'm just in my late 50s now, right? So when you look at the statistics about depression, the WHO has said that depression is now it kind of teeters back and forth. It's always somewhere in the top 3 causes of disability on the planet, right? So we say, depression, that's horrible. People shouldn't be depressed. Let's just get them more medication and therapy and everything will be okay. Even though the vast majority of humanity is not going to take a medication or go to a therapist. More likely what they're going to do is go to their community, and what the community doesn't do for them probably won't be done, right? But here's the thing. Another way of looking at depression is that it's not so much a disease as it is an adaptation.
I agree.
Survival requires slowing down, going into a form of shock, you might say, conserving energy, taking stock of the environment, and then ramping back up. So one could say that, depression is not so much a disease as it is a healthy response to an unhealthy system. And when you think about depression that way, I mean, how is it possible that an entire species of human beings have succumbed in less than 2 generations to this phenomenon? And so the question becomes, is less, what medication should we take? In my mind, is more, what are the practices, and I would dare say largely of our ancestors, right? Because we're all grandchildren of ancestors that for millennia understood how to conduct a society where they were healthy and took care of themselves. They may not have been as materially rich, but they were, spiritually, socially, communally rich. And I just feel like we need to keep working at getting back to that. It doesn't mean that there is no role for medication and therapy. I don't want to leave that impression, but it is to say that a proper response to this global depression is that we recapture the practices, right, of community, the 5 pillars I like to call them, of community, social support, sleep, nutrition, relaxation, movement. We can't take enough medication to overcome a lack of a foundation in those 5 areas. But yet, we lack a general literacy as a mass society and making those things our regular lifestyle that we engage short of becoming ill. But we have to get back to that. I was talking to a friend yesterday. We all need to have blue zone lives. Right.
Yeah.
When I was trained in coaching counseling, I was taught by someone that, depression is anger turned inside.
Yes.
And when we don't have to look too far to all the incidents that have happened where somebody was failed somewhere along the line and how they weren't supported. So I think this is the opportunity with a lot of the technology to go where somebody can't go or don't feel like they have the wherewithal to travel across cyberspace. But you're right about the community, and it doesn't. You can't just have a one and done or hand a pill out to somebody and say you're good now. It has to be a holistic approach to supporting the development of a human.
Yeah.
Right. Because the nature of the human condition, which is that we are all at all times subject to aging, sickness, and death, means that we are all always only temporarily okay. Which is why if we don't have a prevention ethic that is working against the natural processes of aging, sickness, and death, then we're going to be in a bad situation. And, I would like my grandson and my great-grandchildren for this to be kind of like a no-brainer. Because clearly we have not been, we've been raised and socialized in a system and a construct or a paradigm where this is not common sense for us. I think it was for our ancestors. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who said, Julian, you talked about depression as anger turned inward. He said to me, not only are we angry, but trying to ignore it and just drag ourselves along, but the ancestors are also angry.
Interesting.
And that's having an effect on us also, right?
Yes.
So may we have a level of wisdom and literacy and will and purpose that allows us to arise to the occasion of using our technologies to keep ourselves and our children healthy. Really.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I think that's a great message. And there's one last question I want to I want to
one we could
fit in
say
here
or ask.
Okay.
Just under the wire. So yeah, there's a question that we ask of all of our guests. It's always the same one. I'd love to ask it to you today as well. What is an experience that you've had that has shaped who you are today still kind of influences you and informs the kinds of things you talked about today?
Oh, a single experience.
Yeah, I know there's many, many
No pressure.
possibilities.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna express an Uber experience.
Mhm.
And it's something I think about a lot these days. Becoming a grandfather really helped me with this. Community, the
Mm,
blessing of community, right?
mm,
So, um, I am a son of the South, raised in the North of the United States. My father is an IT executive. He's a pastor, and he's a military man, right? Um, my mother was a homemaker for the most part, and I don't have to go into my ancestral. I'm African American, right? So I'm
Mhm.
shaped by all of that.
mhm,
My mother brought me into the world um, as a single mother in her adolescence. And obviously, she would never have been able to have raised me on her own.
mm,
But there are three families. I have three families that came around me and my mother and have provided discipline and encouragement and resources and models and examples. Not often harshly, right? They were all a good enough community, definitely not perfect, right? And it is the greatest pleasure of my life to understand and appreciate and have gratitude for all of the parents and grandparents and mentors and uncles and aunts and right that have gotten me to where I am in life.
mm,
Um, I think regularly about the fact that we all are the wildest dream come true of our grandparents and our ancestors.
mm.
I think about how to be a good ancestor more and more. This is a really good book if you haven't read it.
Mm.
I forget
Which,
the name of the author. I'll put in the show notes called How to Be a Good Ancestor. We don't have to
oh,
wait
wow.
to die to be a good ancestor.
Huh?
We can start being
Yeah.
good ancestors even now, right?
Hmm.
And
Keep
now
taking
that
notes.
I know. I love
Someone
that.
keeps seeing me looking down.
and and now that I have a grandchild, I see myself in the great chain of ancestral cause and effect.
Mm,
This
yeah.
is a collectivistic indigenous way of thinking that frankly helps a lot of my despair and depression,
Mm,
right? That we need to get back to thinking more in terms. But the experience of being in community, Jerome, that's it.
mhm,
That has been the most consequential and impactful, both positive and negative impact of my life.
mm,
The
yeah.
positive has built me up. The negative has given me certain traumas that have helped me to become more resilient as I experience what we call post-traumatic growth.
Mm,
I recognize that in my own life, I am creating the future for my children, and I'm healing traumas and wounds of the ancestors. I was just on the call with my mom last night talking about my uncle. I'm his I'm his generational twin. He named me.
mm,
Ah,
I have his strengths, but I have very many shortcomings that were his shortcomings. And I was talking to my mom about his history. I'm trying to get deeper insight into what shaped him into the character that he was. And I said to my mom, I'm determined not to die like he did
mm,
mm,
with his attitudes and his biases so that we can heal this and so that the impact that I have on the family is a different impact than what he had.
mm.
More of the positive and less of the, not so positive.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
what we're called to. But I think
Absolutely.
that this individualism that we have been steeped in is the root of many of our maladies as a society.
Yeah.
And of course, technology, to bring it full circle, is a wonderful lever of community development and building and nurturing if we can develop the skill and the will to make it so. And that's what the Digital Mental Health Project is about. So thank you for asking that. I didn't even mean to say all of that, but that's what came up for me when you asked me the question.
You're so welcome, and thank you for giving that beautiful response that did bring us full circle. I really love that, and I love that we're ending on this note of community and being a good ancestor today. We're definitely going to be adding that to the show notes.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate the time today. Is there anything that you would like to add in terms of pointing our listeners to certain resources or recommendations?
Yeah, so what comes immediately to mind, I love the work of the Center for Humane Technology. They actually have a free online course around ethical technology that I would encourage, especially those that work in the industry. I would encourage. And then the other one is the Digital Wellness Institute. And their mission is about increasing what we call digital literacy. So, we're hurt by the technology because we're illiterate about its proper effects. Well, we're illiterate about its effects and then the proper use of it. So for the professionals, go to the Center for Humane Technology. For the citizens, go to the Digital Wellness Institute, and we all need to get better so that these tools, we can use it to build houses versus break windows. We break in too many windows. We got to build more houses. The tool doesn't care. We need to care.
Yeah. Love it.
All right.
Yeah, Julienne.
Julienne?
In New York, we have an expression, if you see something, tell somebody. And I think this is, we love all our speakers and we're very impressed with who we gather in our community of this pod. But if there's ever a session to share with everybody, when you see this podcast, to pass it on, this is very important to say, here are options, here are possibilities. Go tell somebody and show somebody and keep telling them till you get it done.
That's right.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think we could, I'd love to have a part 2, 3, 4 to this.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Absolutely. And just kind of follow the evolution of Digital Mental Health Project and because this has been so, I'll say it, inspirational, really. So I just want to remind our listeners that as we come to the end of this episode, please remember to review the episode and subscribe if you haven't already, and go to narrative.com, NARATIV.com, where you can find all of our podcast episodes. The other thing is that we are a company called Narrative, and we offer training programs. And this session is a reflection of the kind of belief system, philosophy that we have, and storytelling is a really big way to create community in our experience. So if that's something that you need in your life, please reach out to us and ask us about our programs. We're always ready to listen to you and happy to do so. So, as always, thanks for listening, and thank you, Julienne, for being my wonderful co-host.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, good equinox to everyone. Be well.
Thank you, Craig. All right, until next time, thank you.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.